Welcome to Reliving the War, an ongoing series here at Wrestling Bios where we compare Raw and Nitro head to head and score each show based on matches and promos. Today we're going back to the 25th of September 1995, the fourth ever episode of Nitro and the third time the WWF and WCW went head to head in the weekly ratings war. This one is interesting because for the first time both shows were actually live. Raw wasn't taped here, so let's see if this made any difference. As a reminder, last week I scored both Raw and Nitro evenly. Last week's war was a draw. Now, I got some feedback regarding how I scored draws. People seem to prefer a separate category for draws, so let's fix this. If we score draws separately then, this means Nitro is ahead with 1 point, Raw has 0 points, and there has been one draw. As another reminder, the shows are both played here as if Raw and Nitro were on at the exact same time on television. We aren't taking time zones or regions into consideration here, and I also have to remind people that the scoring here is based on my personal opinion. You will likely feel different when it comes to who had the better matches or promos, and that's fine. I encourage you to watch these shows on the WWE Network and give me your thoughts in the comments section. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get started. This episode of Raw is the Fallout show from In Your House 3. We will need to take a look at the results from In Your House in order to understand what's going on in this episode of Raw that we're looking at today. After Savio Vega defeated Waylon Mercy in the opening match, we found out that Owen Hart had not arrived at the arena and the triple header tag match might be in jeopardy. A little later on, when Owen still hadn't arrived, Gorilla Monsoon decided that Yokozuna would need to find another tag team partner in order to defend the WWF tag team titles. Jim Cornette selected Davey Boy Smith, so Owen Hart was out of the triple header match and Davey was in. Psycho Sid defeated Henry O. Godwin in a throwaway match. The British Bulldog defeated Bam Bam Bigelow in a decent match, and yes, this also means that Davey Boy worked twice on this show. Dean Douglas got a pinfall win over Razor Ramon after the 1-2-3 Kid unintentionally cost the bad guy the match. Bret Hart defeated Jean-Pierre Lafitte and he got his jacket back. And in the triple header tag match, Shawn Michaels and Diesel won the tag titles. Owen Hart appeared towards the end of the match and the King of Hearts got pinned by Diesel. So even though Owen was not legally in the tag match, he still took the loss and the tag titles went to the two dudes with attitudes. WWF Monday Night Raw begins with a recap of In Your House. There's a lot of controversy here regarding the finish of the triple header tag match. We then see Jim Cornette and Clarence Mason in a boardroom with WWF President Gorilla Monsoon, and it's revealed that the tag titles have gone back to Owen Hart and Yokozuna because Owen Hart was not a legal man in the triple header main event at In Your House. Gorilla told Jim Cornette that Owen and Yokozuna were still the tag champions, but they would have to defend the titles on this very episode of Raw. So we've got plenty of story going into this episode of the WWF's flagship television show. Good stuff. The Monday Night Raw intro then plays, so let's go over to WCW Nitro and see what's going on. Eric Bischoff welcomes us to the show. Steve McMichael says there is no show hotter than Monday Nitro, and Bobby Heenan makes fun of Pepe. Eric tells us we will hear from Hulk Hogan on this episode of Nitro while also hyping the Lex Luger and Randy Savage feud. Nothing else going on here, so let's start our first matches. Nitro kicks things off with Alex Wright versus Disco Inferno, and Raw starts their show with Skip of the Body Donnas, better known as Chris Candido, taking on a returning Marty Jannetty. Disco Inferno had only debuted in WCW around this time, and here he was getting a match on Nitro. This one was okay. Disco was trying to get his character over by fixing his hair and dancing in between moves, and I get the feeling that this match was booked simply to expose the Disco Inferno character to a wider audience. We know Alex Wright is very capable of having good matches, but he played a defensive role throughout this entire bout. Most of his offense came from counter moves. There were a few dodgy spots also. This stun gun, for example, didn't look very elegant, but still, the match was fine. Alex Wright got the pinfall win with a surprise backslide. On commentary, Eric Bischoff told fans that there's no point touching the remote control. There is nothing happening anywhere else on television that can compete with WCW Nitro. Immediately following the match, we see Hulk Hogan in a recorded backstage segment. He's wearing a neck brace thanks to the Giant's attack at Fall Brawl, and the Hulkster lays out a challenge to the Giant. Hogan says he will get a monster truck and the two men can have a monster truck match in the future, and afterwards, Hogan will be glad to give the Giant a WCW Championship match. If there was ever a promo that precedes an unfortunate event, well, here it is, brothers. Let's flip over to Raw then. Marty Jannetty versus Chris Candido. Can you imagine what this match would have been like if Marty was still in his prime? People like to rip on Marty, and yes, I do agree, a lot of the flack he gets is very much deserved, but once upon a time, Marty was extremely good in the ring. Still, let's take away perceptions here and give him a chance. It will be interesting here to see how he fared against Skip of the Body Donnas, a great wrestler in his own right. I watched this match right after the Alex Wright match, and what really stood out here is how Marty's in-ring experience just made the whole bout seem more professional. Can't believe I'm saying that, but everything Marty and Skip done here was on point. There was some fast offense from both men. Sonny was used in a few spots. The bout had ups and downs as both men got in an equal amount of moves. It just seemed like a more polished match in comparison to Disco Inferno versus Alex Wright. I put this down to the WCW guys being so young. Disco, in particular, was only beginning to get TV time on a big scale after all. So yeah, from a pure wrestling standpoint, Jannetty and Candido completely blew Disco and Alex Wright out of the water. I wasn't expecting this either. I was expecting Chris Candido to cover up Marty's in-ring shortcomings, but this wasn't the case at all. Marty gets the pinfall win, the live audience goes nuts, and this is a point for Raw here. Check this one out, you'll be pleasantly surprised. After the match, we see more clips from In Your House and more clips from the boardroom meeting with Jim Cornette, Clarence Mason and Gorilla Monsoon. Over the next 15 minutes, Raw presents the WWF Tag Title match that Gorilla Monsoon had ordered during the boardroom meeting, Owen, Hart and Yokozuna taking on the Smoking Guns. On Nitro, during the same 15-minute period, we would have 2 promos and a match. This makes things difficult to score, but we'll have to compare one WWF match to a WCW match along with 2 promos. No other choice here, but in saying that, the WCW match may already be a write-off. It's Kurosawa taking on Sergeant Craig Pittman. Before this match took place though, we have Mean Gene Okerlund interviewing Macho Man Randy Savage and Lex Luger. Remember, these two were about to fight last week, all stemming from Luger hitting Savage during the War Games match at Fall Brawl. Anyway, Lex Luger challenges the Macho Man to a match next week on Nitro. If Lex Luger can't defeat Randy Savage, Lex promises to leave the company. Savage accepts the challenge. This one was a little short and it felt a lot like last week's promo also, so I haven't got much to say about this. It did fall a little flat. Eric Bischoff then announces the Halloween Havoc Machine vs Machine Monster Truck match between Hulk Hogan and the Giant. The wording used by Eric Bischoff doesn't really tell us how this match will play out, but Eric does mention that the Giant will challenge Hulk Hogan for the WCW Championship after the Monster Truck match. It really leaves us with more questions than answers, to be honest. The promotion of Halloween Havoc 1995 was nearly as bad as the pay-per-view itself, but we'll cross that bridge once we get to it. Let's look at Kurosawa versus Sergeant Craig Pittman. Fans of Japanese wrestling will know Kurosawa as Manabu Nakanishi, a man who had an incredible run with New Japan Pro Wrestling that lasted right up until February of 2020. Nakanishi's excursion brought him to WCW, where he joined Colonel Robert Parker's stud stable, and here he was getting some exposure on Monday Nitro. This match here with Craig Pittman is a bit of a mismatch. Nakanishi worked the traditional Japanese strong style while picking a body part Hart to focus his offense on, and he also displayed some rather violent looking holds and moves. And Craig Pittman, well, Craig wasn't really doing any of this stuff. He wasn't doing much of anything, if I'm honest. Pittman was a very green wrestler who had only been in the ring for around 5 months at this point, and what we have here is a match that fails to get off the mark as much as Nakanishi tries. It's cool to see Nakanishi here, but that's really where the fun stops, I'm afraid. As a complete match from bell to bell, this wasn't great, and it kinda makes you question why Sergeant Craig Pittman and even Disco Inferno were put on a Nitro TV show so early in their careers. After this match, Mean Gene interviews Arn Anderson and Brian Pillman. These two would be facing Ric Flair and Ric's unnamed tag partner in the future. We were supposed to know this already, by the way. This segment was booked in such a manner that everyone involved assumed that we watched WCW Saturday Night. Anderson and Pillman talked about how Ric Flair had stabbed everyone in the back and therefore he would struggle to find a tag team partner. Remember too, just last week, Ric Flair said he was on a mission to find Arn Anderson, and here was Double A in the middle of the ring, and Flair was nowhere to be seen. Little things like this always happened on Nitro. It would be a running theme for years to come, and it's something that always bothered me about the show. The continuity just wasn't there sometimes. Okay, let's flip over to Raw and watch the tag team title match. To be honest, I already have a feeling that Raw is going to win the point here. In the last 15 minutes, Nitro just put on 2 promos in a match that really didn't do anything for me at all. It felt like wasted TV time. The promos could have been announcements made on commentary, and the mid-card match was admittedly all over the place. So let's see what happened over on the WWF show. This tag match featuring Owen and Yokozuna taking on the Smoking Guns was a rematch from WrestleMania 11. Yokozuna came out as Owen's surprise partner at Mania, and the two won the tag titles on the grandest stage of all. So the Smoking Guns were trying to get their titles back here. The Guns had the upper hand for the first portion of the match, but the game changer Yokozuna was there to slow Billy and Bart down. The audience went nuts when Billy Gunn managed to bring Yokozuna to the mat, but the tag champions were able to take control by using underhanded tactics. Things maybe got a little too slow when Yokozuna was on the offense. Remember, Yokozuna wasn't the performer he had been even a year prior due to an incredible amount of weight gain, so the Smoking Guns did have to sometimes work around Yokozuna during this match. That being said, this was still a fun bout. Owen and Yokozuna done all they could to keep Billy Gunn away from his partner. More of that solid tag team wrestling I spoke about last week that seems to be completely missing in action these days on WWE wrestling shows. Anyway, Bart gets the tag, Yokozuna inadvertently splashes Owen Hart, the Smoking Guns get the pinfall win, and we have new tag team champions. The audience reaction too was excellent. Shawn Michaels and Diesel celebrated in the ring with the Smoking Guns, and yeah, I'm giving this one to Raw too. With Nitro putting on 2 promos in a match over these last 15 minutes, the old saying of less is more definitely springs to mind here. The tag team match, and indeed these 15 minutes of WWF programming, felt a lot more structured than Nitro. WCW was trying to promote next week's matches, pay-per-view matches, a tag match that we didn't even have a date for, nor did we know who Ric Flair's partner would be, and the WWF took the simple path of putting on a solid wrestling match along with a title change. Raw gets the point here, but do let me know what you preferred in the comments section. Over on Nitro we have a match while WWF Raw features an interview with President Gorilla Monsoon. On Nitro, the Taskmaster is scheduled to take on the Macho Man Randy Savage, so let's check out the match first. Within the first few moments of the bout, the Zodiac comes to the ring to offer his assistance to Kevin Sullivan. This would mean that Savage had an uphill battle during the entire match. The Zodiac would attack Macho Man outside the ring behind the referee's back, giving the Taskmaster the upper hand. Savage had enough. He brought the Zodiac into the ring and began beating him down. The ref tried to stop Savage, leading to the Macho Man pushing the referee down and getting himself disqualified. The Giant then showed up to take out Savage. 2 or 3 mid-card guys tried to stop the Giant, but it was no use. Just then, Lex Luger came down to the ring. We didn't know if Lex would attack Savage or attack the Giant. It looked like Luger was about to go after the Macho Man, but the Giant ended up chokeslamming the total package before the Dungeon of Doom left the ring. Due to how many segments and promos WCW tried to stuff into this episode of Nitro, this match here never really got started. The Giant's attack at the end of the match took up as much time as the Savage vs Taskmaster bout itself, so if you're looking for a decent wrestling match, then this isn't it. While all of this was going on, Gorilla Monsoon was being interviewed by Doc Hendricks over on Raw. Gorilla talked about the matches we would see at In Your House 4. Davey Boy Smith would get a WWF title match against Diesel, and Shawn Michaels would defend his IC title against Dean Douglas. Gorilla also announced that Bret Hart would be getting a WWF title match at the 1995 Survivor Series against whoever the champion may be. I'll give the point to Nitro here. Anyone would choose a match over pay-per-view announcements delivered in this manner, and I know it seems unfair to put match announcements against a match itself, but it's just the way these two shows have been presented here. Okay, it's time for our main events. The WWF presents The Undertaker versus the British Bulldog, while WCW gives us Lex Luger versus Meng. Let's start with Raw then, and I'm not sure if Vince McMahon was throwing shade at WCW here, but McMahon said on commentary that Davey Boy Smith trying to topple The Undertaker is a task we all wanted to see. I'm not sure if he was throwing jabs at Kevin Sullivan in WCW with this comment, but it certainly sounds like it.
And that is going to be a task we all want to see. Yeah, stay with it.
Anyway, this match here was all about The Undertaker's mobility. Davey Boy went after the dead man's leg, which gave the Bulldog a huge advantage throughout the entire match. The Undertaker took quite a lot of offense here. Davey kept the pressure on, but Taker kept kicking out of pin attempts, sitting up from the mat only to take further punishment from the Bulldog. Remember too that Davey Boy was getting a title shot at the next In Your House show. The WWF wanted to present Davey as a threat to Diesel's championship reign, and you can tell that Davey was getting presented as a much more aggressive superstar here. Davey versus Diesel is not a match that I would have booked, by the way. I think Owen Hart would have been a better choice when you consider how In Your House 3 ended, but sometimes you just have to take what you're given. The match ended via disqualification. King Mabel came to the ring and attacked The Undertaker. Shawn Michaels and Diesel hit the ring for the save, prompting Owen Hart and Yokozuna to also show up. The Smoking Guns then came out to even the odds. The heels retreated. The Undertaker shook hands with Diesel and Shawn, and the main event is now over. This match wasn't bad at all. It was interesting seeing Davey getting presented as a main eventer here. Undertaker had a decent match too, which really saw him selling more than anything. And yeah, it was fine, no complaints here, except maybe for the DQ finish. Vince McMahon promotes next week's matches, and the show goes off the air with Shawn Michaels and Diesel posing in the ring, for whatever reason. So can Lex Luger and Meng put on a better show than The Undertaker versus Davey Boy Smith? Lex Luger started the match in pain. Remember, he had just taken a chokeslam from the Giant, so Meng would have an early advantage. Eric Bischoff couldn't have cared less about the beginning of this match. He was more concerned about Hulk Hogan. Eric said on commentary that Hogan had called into WCW offices and he wasn't happy with how things had gone down on Nitro with the Dungeon of Doom, and Hulk Hogan would be live on Nitro next week. In the ring, Meng dominated Luger. The match was laid out in such a way that fans would sympathise with Lex Luger, and to be fair, the fans did rally behind Luger on a few occasions. A lot of this match was spent on the mat with Luger stuck in holds. He would fight back, but Meng would take him right out again. There's this weird spot here where Luger goes for a clothesline in the corner. He 100% hits the clothesline, but for whatever reason, Luger decides to take a bump afterwards as Meng is left standing there wondering what the hell just happened. I know Lex Luger has fans. I don't mind some of his earlier work at all, but it's things like this that kind of paint Luger in a bad light. Some of the things he would do in matches and even some of his promos made very little sense, but still, the guy would keep getting pushed. I know Lex was trying to sell the beating he just took in this match when he fell after the clothesline, but this doesn't explain why he gets right back up and starts laying in kicks as if nothing happened over the past 5 minutes or so. It may sound like nitpicking here, but it's also the main event here. We can overlook Disco Inferno and Alex Wright being so young and out of their element, but Luger had a wealth of experience by this point. Anyway, Meng pulled out the spike behind the referee's back, Luger got hit with it, and Meng gets the pinfall win. Raw's main event was much better here. Both matches told a similar story in regards to one competitor dominating the majority of the match, but Raw just pulled it off a lot better. While X was also booked to lose this match when he was going to face Savage the next week in the main event is beyond me also. Just a really strange episode of Nitro here. It all felt rushed, some things just didn't make sense, and yeah, the show is now off the air. Alright, so let's check out how I scored the September 25th, 1995 Monday Night Wrestling shows. Marty, Jannetty and Skip surprised me in a match that I felt was better than Disco Inferno's bout with Wright, so that's a point to Raw. Nitro then put on 2 promos and the Kurosawa match, while Raw kept things simple with a tag team title match. I felt the tag match was much more entertaining than what WCW put on here. It all felt really rushed over on Nitro. Randy Savage and the Taskmaster had a mediocre match at best, but it was still better than Gorilla Monsoon talking about the upcoming In Your House 4 matches, so Nitro gets an easy point here. And finally, Lex Luger and Meng didn't really stand much of a chance in comparison to Davey Boy Smith versus The Undertaker. Raw wins its first week here on Reliving the War, 3 points to 1, meaning the overall scores are now 1 apiece with 1 draw. As an entire package, I absolutely feel Raw was better here. There may have been less matches and segments, but that also meant that the WWF could take their time with what they presented. Nitro, on this week, done nothing but promote upcoming matches for future shows while putting on shorter, less meaningful matches. When looking at the television ratings, Nitro was able to capture more viewers than Raw on this week. Raw recorded a low 1.9 rating while Nitro got a 2.7. The high viewership of this mediocre Nitro show, however, would lead to Nitro not getting another clear-cut victory for around a month. Judging by the numbers and how things worked out in the following weeks, fans may have been slightly turned off by this episode of Nitro. The WWF was able to remain steady in the weeks that followed, but we'll cover all of this here on Reliving the War in the next few uploads. Next week we will look at the October 2nd episodes of Raw and Nitro. Raw featured Bret Hart vs Jean-Pierre Lafitte in a rematch from In Your House 3, while Nitro would deliver the Randy Savage vs Lex Luger match that they had been promoting over the past lot of weeks. As always, thanks very much for watching.